First corner. For more than 100 years, humanity had tried to fit in with the rest of the galaxy. They followed the rules set by the Galactic Council, paid their dues, sent ambassadors to distant star systems, and kept their voices low when older, prouder species spoke. The Council was made up of beings who had been traveling the stars long before humans had even built their first rocket. To them, Earth was just another young, loud species, eager, clumsy, and not quite ready for real responsibility. Humans accepted this. They smiled through the insults, signed the unfair trade deals, and swallowed their pride every time a Virel diplomat called them children with fire. But everything changed when the Zenthar slavers began raiding human colonies near the Kalis Belt. The Zenthar were not members of the Council, but they had powerful allies. They used fast, silent ships to strike remote outposts, places where families farmed asteroid soil or mined rare crystals for Earth's growing tech industries. Men, women, and even children were taken, sold, erased. When the first distress calls reached Earth, the United Earth Assembly demanded action. They sent formal pleas to the Council, citing treaties that promised mutual protection among member worlds. The Council's response came a week later. Cold, calm, final, Counselor. Vex of the Karathi delegation explained that the Zenthar operated in disputed neutral zones, and that interfering would violate the Sovereign Non-Intervention Accord. In plain words, it wasn't their problem. Other species nodded in agreement. After all, the Zenthar hadn't touched their people. Why risk war over a few thousand humans? Back on Earth, people watched the broadcast in silence. In cities from New Chicago to Lunadome, faces turned grim. Parents held their kids tighter. Veterans of the Martian border skirmishes clenched their fists. The message was clear. Humanity didn't matter enough to protect. President Daniel Hayes had been in office for just 18 months. He was a quiet man, once a school teacher from Oregon, known more for his calm than his fury. But that night, in the dim light of the presidential residence, he made a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, he stood before the United Earth Assembly in Geneva. Not in the usual diplomatic robes, but in a simple dark suit. No flags behind him, no music. Just him, a podium, and billions watching across the solar system and beyond. Today, he began, his voice steady but heavy, we end our participation in a system that sees our lives as negotiable. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply laid out the truth. For over a century, humanity had given more than it received. It had shared its medical advances, opened its shipyards to joint projects, and even defended Council supply lines during the Drathan uprisings, without being asked. And in return, silence, indifference, betrayal. From this moment forward, Hayes said, Earth recognizes no authority above its own people. We withdraw from all Galactic Council treaties. We recall every ambassador. We suspend all trade agreements tied to Council oversight. And we declare that any ship, military or civilian, that enters human-controlled space without explicit permission will be treated as hostile. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some delegates stood in shock. Others nodded slowly, as if they'd been waiting for this day all along. Hayes paused, then added one final line that would echo across the galaxy. We are not asking for a seat at your table anymore. We are building our own. The broadcast ended. No fanfare. No follow-up statement. Just static. Across human space, orders went out instantly. Embassies on worlds like Tarsus Prime and Helios Minor locked their doors. Diplomatic staff boarded shuttles with only what they could carry. Fleet Command reclassified all Council vessels as unauthorized contacts. Even the Joint Research Station orbiting Neptune powered down its comms array and switched to internal protocols only. On Mars, Captain Elena Ruiz stood on the observation deck of the orbital dockyard, watching as engineers sealed the last access hatch on the newly retrofitted cruiser, Aurora. She'd spent 20 years working with Karathi engineers, sharing schematics, drinking synth coffee with Virel officers. Now all of it was over. Her orders were clear. Prepare for full defensive posture. No exceptions. In the asteroid belt, Miner Kyle Dawson turned off his Council-approved comms unit and plugged in an old Earth-band radio. Static hissed, then a familiar voice. President Hayes' speech rebroadcast on civilian channels. His daughter, only 6, tugged his sleeve. Daddy, are we in trouble? she asked. He knelt, brushed dust from her cheek, and said, "No, sweetheart. For the first time in a long time, we're not." Meanwhile, on the gleaming silver spire of the Galactic Council's central chamber in the Cygnus Nexus, panic began to spread. Counselor Lyra Voss of the Varel Confederacy stormed into the emergency session, her bioluminescent skin flickering with agitation. "They've gone silent," she said. "All channels. All frequencies. It's like they've vanished." Karathi envoys argued it was a bluff. The Helios Collective suggested it was grief-driven rage that would pass. But deep down, even the most arrogant among them felt a chill. Humans were unpredictable. They'd gone from primitive planet dwellers to interstellar travelers in less than 2 centuries. They'd rebuilt after asteroid strikes, solar flares, and civil wars. And now they'd been pushed too far. Back on Earth, in a quiet office in Geneva, President Hayes sat alone. The weight of his decision pressed on him, but there was no regret. He looked out the window at the city lights, millions of lives, millions of hopes. He hadn't started a war. He'd drawn a line. And sometimes lines were the only thing that kept people safe. Far above, in the silent dark between stars, human ships powered up their drives. Not to attack, not yet, but to watch, to wait. To make sure the galaxy understood one simple truth. Humanity was no longer asking to be heard. It was speaking, and the rest would have to listen. Part 2. The silence from Earth was louder than any war cry. Within hours of President Hayes' speech, every human outpost beyond the Sol system went dark. No more routine check-ins, no more trade manifests, no friendly chatter over open comms. Even the small research bases on icy moons like Europa and Titan shut down their external signals. To the rest of the galaxy, it felt like humanity had simply vanished, but they hadn't vanished. They were watching. On Luna, deep beneath the Sea of Tranquility, General Marcus Boone stood in the heart of Earth's new strategic command center. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of holographic star maps. Red markers blinked along the edges of human space. Old trade routes, former diplomatic lanes, jump points once shared freely with Council allies. Now every one of them was monitored. Every ship that approached was logged, scanned, and tracked until it turned back or was warned away. Boone wasn't a man of many words. He'd spent most of his career on Mars, defending mining convoys from pirate raids. He knew what silence meant. It wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Across the system, the same quiet readiness spread. In shipyards orbiting Ceres, workers like Kyle Dawson, now reassigned from mining to engineering, worked double shifts welding armor plates onto frigates that had once carried diplomats. On Ganymede, technicians rerouted power grids to prioritize defense over comfort. Even schools on Earth began running emergency drills, not for earthquakes or storms, but for signal blackouts and comms failures. The galaxy, meanwhile, was losing its mind. In the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, species that had ignored humanity for decades now demanded answers. The Varel sent 3 formal inquiries. All went unanswered. The Karathi tried to ping old military frequencies they'd shared during joint exercises. Static. The Helios Collective dispatched a civilian science vessel toward the edge of human space, hoping for a peaceful signal. It got within 2 light minutes of the Neptune perimeter before a human patrol ship appeared out of nowhere, matched its speed, and played a single audio file on all open channels. "Turn back. You are not welcome." The science vessel turned, but the message spread like fire. Counselor Jalen Rook, a calm and thoughtful representative from the Helios Collective, tried to reason with his peers. "They're not attacking," he said during an emergency session. "They're just closing their door. Maybe we should ask why instead of assuming the worst." But fear had taken root. The Zenthar slavers, sensing weakness, began testing the edges of human territory again. They sent a single raider toward a small colony on Proxima B. It never made it past the Oort cloud. A human stealth corvette, unmarked, unannounced, disabled its engines with a precision EMP burst and left it drifting. No boarding. No destruction. Just a warning written in silence. That incident changed everything. Now even species that had once mocked human impulsiveness began to wonder. How had they found the Zenthar so quickly? How had they struck without being seen? And why show restraint instead of revenge? Back on Earth, Dr. Naomi Ellis watched the data stream from the Proxima incident in her lab in Denver. She wasn't a soldier. She was a strategist, a thinker who studied how civilizations reacted under pressure. She'd helped draft the new defense doctrine after the Council's betrayal. Her idea was simple. Don't fight unless you must, but make sure your enemies know you can. They're scared, she told General Boone over a secure line. Not of our weapons, of our silence, of not knowing what we'll do next. Boone grunted. Good. Let them wonder. Meanwhile, civilian life on Earth tried to go on. Markets stayed open. Trains ran on time. Children went to school. But there was a new tension in the air. People spoke less about galactic politics and more about home, about protecting what they'd built. Posters appeared in cities, stand together. Our space, our rules. Not angry. Just firm. Captain Elena Ruiz, now commanding the cruiser Aurora, patrolled the outer rim of the Sol system. Her crew was tense but focused. They'd trained for war, but this was different. This was waiting, watching, being ready without showing your hand. One night, as the Aurora drifted near the Kuiper Belt, her sensors picked up a faint signal. Not a ship, not a weapon, just a data packet bouncing off an old relay satellite. It was from a human freighter that had been stranded near Alpha Centauri when the recall order came. The crew had managed to jury-rig a transmitter. The message was short. We're coming home. Please don't shoot. Ruiz authorized a safe corridor. She sent a reply. Welcome back. We've got you. That small act, kindness wrapped in caution, was the true face of humanity now. Not rage, not conquest. Protection. But the Council didn't see it that way. In their eyes, the silence was a threat. The disabled Zenthar ship was proof of aggression. The closed borders were an act of defiance. And so, behind closed doors, they began to plan. A secret meeting was held between the Karathi High Command and the Varel Defense Directorate. They proposed a joint blockade. Not an invasion, just a show of force. Cut off human trade lanes, force them back to the negotiating table. They believed humans couldn't survive long without galactic resources. They believed hunger and isolation would bring them to their knees. What they didn't know was that Earth had spent the last decade building self-sufficiency. Fusion reactors powered cities. Vertical farms fed billions. Asteroid mining provided rare metals. Humanity didn't need the galaxy anymore, not the way the galaxy needed to believe it did. As the Council finalized its blockade plan, President Hayes met with his advisors in Geneva. They'd intercepted fragments of the proposal through old back-channel relays. Hayes listened quietly, then asked one question. Are we ready? General Boone nodded. Every ship, every station, every citizen. Hayes looked out the window again. The sun was setting over Lake Geneva, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. He thought of his childhood, of fishing with his father, of believing the stars were just lights in the sky. Now those stars held enemies, allies, and everything in between. Then let them come, he said. And so, as the galaxy buzzed with rumors and fear, humanity held its breath. Not in fear, not in anger, but in readiness. They had closed their door. Now they would decide who got to knock. Part 3 of weeks passed with no word from Earth, no signals. No ships leaving human space. No replies to messages, not even from old friends or former allies. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy like the quiet before a storm. And the Galactic Council could feel it pressing down on them. At first, they thought it was a bluff, a dramatic show of anger that would fade once humans realized how much they depended on galactic trade. But as days turned into weeks, doubt crept in. Human-made medicines stopped flowing to Varel hospitals. Rare Earth-grown alloys vanished from Karathi factories. Even simple things like human-designed entertainment streams or educational programs disappeared from public networks. Species that had taken these for granted suddenly felt the loss. Then came the rumors. A Karathi scout ship, sent to monitor the edge of human space, went missing. Not destroyed. Not captured, just gone. Its last transmission showed a flash of light, too fast for weapons fire and then static. When it reappeared 3 days later, drifting near Neptune, its systems were intact but its crew was unconscious. Medical scans showed no injury, only deep neural fatigue, as if their minds had been gently shut down and restarted. The ship's logs had been wiped clean except for one line. You were warned. That was when panic truly began. Council chambers, once filled with calm debate, now echoed with raised voices and frantic gestures. The Varel demanded stronger action. The Karathi called for immediate military readiness. Even the usually peaceful Helios Collective grew uneasy. Councillor Jalen Rook tried to calm them. "This isn't war," he insisted. "It's a boundary. They're telling us where they end and we begin." But fear drowned out reason. Behind closed doors, the council voted. Not openly, not proudly, but in a hushed emergency session, with only senior delegates present, they approved the blockade. It would begin at the 5 main jump lanes leading into human-controlled space. No human ships would be allowed to leave. No outside ships would be allowed to enter. Supplies would be cut off. Communications jammed. They believed it would last only a few weeks, just long enough for Earth to come crawling back, begging for mercy. What they didn't know was that Earth had expected this. Deep in the Sol system, General Marcus Boone watched the Council's fleet movements on his star map. Red icons gathered near the Perseus Gate, the Cygnus Corridor, the Helios Rift, all major entry points. He didn't look worried. He looked ready. On Luna, President Hayes received the final report. "They're moving," Boone said over the secure line. "Blockade starts in 48 hours. Hayes nodded. "Then we show them what silence really means." Across human space, orders went out, not to attack but to prepare. Every ship, every station, every drone was placed on standby. Civilian freighters were recalled. Colonies went into low-profile mode. Power grids shifted to internal reserves. It wasn't war footing. It was something quieter, something sharper. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Aurora, Captain Elena Ruiz reviewed her crew's readiness. They'd trained for this moment, not to fight but to stand, to be seen without being touched. Her first officer, a young man named Leo Grant, asked, "What if they fire on us?" Ruiz looked at him. "Then we respond, but only enough to stop them. Not to punish, not to scare, to protect." Back on Earth, Kyle Dawson helped install the last of the new sensor arrays on Ceres Station. These weren't weapons. They were eyes, watching, listening, mapping every move the Council made. Dr. Naomi Ellis monitored the data from Denver, feeding patterns into predictive models. She knew the Council would make mistakes. Arrogance always did, and they did. On the day the blockade began, the Karathi sent their flagship, the Iron Maw, to lead the line at the Perseus Gate. It was a massive vessel, built to intimidate. Behind it, dozens of support ships formed a wall of steel and energy shields. They broadcast a message on all frequencies. All human vessels must return to Sol space. "Any attempt to cross this line will be met with force." No reply came. For 6 hours, nothing happened. The Council fleet held position. Tension built. Then, without warning, space around them shimmered, not with weapons, not with explosions, with ships, dozens of them, sleek, dark, and utterly silent. Human cruisers, frigates, and stealth corvettes emerged from slipstream all at once, forming a perfect ring around the blockade line. They didn't fire. They didn't speak. They just appeared as if they'd been there all along. The Iron Maw's captain ordered weapons hot. But before he could act, every human ship broadcast the same message in over 200 languages. "You do not control our borders." Then, as one, they powered up their gravitic drives not to attack, but to shift position. In perfect unison, they moved into a new formation that blocked the Council's own escape routes. It was a mirror of the blockade, but tighter, smarter, calmer. The Council fleet froze. They realized in that moment that humanity hadn't been hiding. They'd been waiting, and they'd been watching everything. The Karathi flagship tried to send a warning, but its comms were jammed, not by noise but by a clean, precise signal that simply overwrote their frequency with silence. Their sensors flickered. Their targeting systems went blind for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to understand. If humans wanted to destroy them, they already could have. Then just as suddenly as they appeared, the human fleet vanished. One moment they were there, surrounding the blockade. The next, empty space. The Council ships were left alone, shaken and humiliated. News of the encounter spread faster than any weapon. Species across the galaxy watched the sensor logs, grainy but clear enough. Humans hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't even raised their shields. They'd simply shown up, made their point, and left. It was more terrifying than any battle. In the council chamber, voices grew quieter. Councillor Lyra Voss refused to speak for an entire session. Jalen Rook finally said what everyone was thinking. We underestimated them. Not their strength. Their discipline. Back on Earth, there was no celebration. No victory speeches. President Hayes simply said they needed to see the line. Now they have. Captain Ruiz returned the Aurora to patrol near Saturn. Her crew was tired but proud. Leo Grant looked at the stars and whispered, "They'll think twice next time." And they would, because humanity had done something the galaxy hadn't seen in centuries. They'd used power not to dominate but to define, not to conquer but to say this far and no farther. The blockade remained in place, but it was empty now. Just ships floating in fear, guarding a line that no longer mattered, because the real boundary wasn't in space, it was in the minds of those who had dared to cross it. Gartfor. The blockade lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, as the Karathi flagship Iron Maw drifted in uneasy silence near the Perseus Gate, its sensors lit up again. Not with weapons fire or distress calls, but with movement. A lot of it. From every direction, human ships returned, not in a scattered wave, but in perfect formation, carriers the size of small moons, frigates with hulls darker than space itself, and in the center a new class of vessel no one had seen before. Gravitic cruisers, their surfaces smooth and unbroken, humming with quiet energy. This time, there was no message. No warning, just presence. The Council fleet braced for attack, shields flared, weapons charged. But the human armada did nothing. They simply held position, engines idling, lights dimmed. Then, as if guided by a single mind, every ship in the human fleet turned their bows toward the blockade line and held there. Not advancing, not retreating. Just waiting. It was the most terrifying thing the Council had ever seen, because it wasn't aggression. It was certainty. On the bridge of the Iron Maw, Captain Vorel of the Karathi stared at the display, his claws gripping the armrests until they cracked. He had expected rage. He had prepared for battle. But this calm, this control, it made no sense. Why show such power and not use it? Why gather an armada and just stand? He didn't understand. And that scared him more than any weapon. Back on Earth, General Marcus Boone watched the live feed from Luna Command. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just nodded once. The plan was working. Not because they had scared the Council, but because they had shown them something new. Strength without cruelty, power without pride. In Denver, Dr. Naomi Ellis reviewed the data streaming in from the edge of human space. Every Council ship was broadcasting fear signals, subtle shifts in energy output, erratic comms traffic, even crew biometrics leaking through old diplomatic channels. They were panicking, not because they thought they'd lose a fight, but because they realized they never truly knew what humanity was capable of. And they were right. For years, humans had shared only what they wanted the galaxy to see. Friendly tech, open trade routes, cooperative research. They'd hidden their real advances, not out of malice but caution. Now that caution had become their shield. On Ceres Station, Kyle Dawson finished calibrating the last gravitic relay. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tool, one that bent local space just enough to let human ships appear and disappear without warning. The Council thought it was magic. It was just physics. Human physics. Meanwhile, Captain Elena Ruiz stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching the blockade ships through the main viewport. She could see their lights flicker, nervous, unsure. She remembered the days when she used to share coffee with Karathi officers, laughing about engine quirks and bad rations. Now they saw her as a threat. And maybe they were right, not because she wanted to hurt them, but because she would protect her people at any cost. The human fleet held its position for exactly 1 hour. Then, without a single command broadcast, every ship powered down their external lights. For a moment, the blockade line went dark. The only thing visible was the faint glow of Earth's distant sun, reflecting off human hulls like whispers. And then, all at once, they vanished. Not with a flash. Not with a roar. Just gone, as if they'd never been there. The Council ships were left alone again. But this time the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Within hours, reports flooded the Galactic Council chamber. Every blockade post had seen the same thing. Human fleets appearing, holding still, then disappearing. No shots fired. No demands made. Just a demonstration of control so complete it felt like a lesson. Counselor Jalen Rook stood before the assembly, his voice low but firm. "They are not trying to win a war," he said. "They are showing us they don't need to. But pride is hard to kill." Some council members still argued for escalation. "They're bluffing," claimed a Varel delegate. "No species can sustain total isolation." Others whispered about secret alliances, hidden weapons, even biological threats. Fear breeds stories, and the galaxy was full of them now. Yet behind the bluster, doubt had taken root. Species that once laughed at human emotions now wondered if that emotion, loyalty, protectiveness, quiet resolve, was what made them dangerous. They didn't fight for glory. They fought for home. Back on Earth, life continued. Children played in parks under artificial suns. Factories hummed with production. Farms on Mars grew wheat under red skies. There was no panic, no rush. Just steady, quiet confidence. President Hayes walked through the gardens of the presidential residence, hands in his pockets. He didn't watch the news. He didn't need to. He knew what the fleet had done. He also knew it wasn't about showing off. It was about making sure the next time someone thought about raiding a human colony, they'd remember the silence, the stillness, the certainty. In orbit, the Aurora returned to its patrol route. Leo Grant asked Captain Ruiz, "Do you think they'll try again?" She looked at the stars and said, "Maybe. But next time they'll ask first." And that was the point. Humanity hadn't built an empire. They hadn't declared war. They'd simply drawn a line in the void and stood behind it, not with shouts but with silence. Not with fire but with focus. And in doing so, they'd changed the balance of the galaxy without firing a single shot. The blockade remained, but it was hollow now. Just metal and fear floating in space. Because everyone, council, slavers, neutral traders, knew the truth. The real power wasn't in who had the biggest guns. It was in who had the will to use them wisely, and humanity had just shown they had both. Part 5. Months passed and the galaxy changed. The Galactic Council still sat in its grand chamber in the Cygnus Nexus, but the air was different now. The confidence was gone. The certainty that older species knew best had cracked. Species that once ignored Earth's voice now checked their comms twice a day, hoping for a signal that never came. Trade routes once controlled by the Council began to shift. Independent systems, small colonies, mining outposts, free ports, started looking towards Sol not with fear but with hope. They saw what humanity had done, stood alone, held firm, and won respect without bloodshed. And they wanted that too. On the edge of the Orion Spur, the Helios Collective quietly opened direct talks with Mars, not through the Council, not with permission. Just two groups of people speaking as equals. The Varel, once proud and distant, sent a civilian science team to Titan with a simple request: to study human atmospheric recycling tech. They came in an unarmed shuttle. They were allowed to land. Back on Earth, life settled into a new rhythm, not one of war but of quiet strength. Schools taught children not just math and history, but the value of boundaries and the cost of silence. Factories built not just ships, but tools for peace, clean energy cores, medical drones, water purifiers. Humanity wasn't closing itself off. It was choosing who to let in. President Daniel Hayes rarely spoke in public now, but when he did, the galaxy listened. His words were few, but they carried weight. He didn't boast. He didn't threaten. He simply stated facts. And facts, it turned out, were harder to ignore than shouts. In Luna Command, General Marcus Boone watched as new data came in. Independent systems were signing mutual aid pacts with Earth, not military alliances. Just agreements: if you help us, we'll help you. No council oversight, no hidden clauses. Just trust. It was a small thing, but it was spreading. Captain Elena Ruiz took the Aurora on a new kind of mission. Not patrol, not defense. Escort. She guided a convoy of civilian freighters from Proxima B to a free station near Sirius. The ships carried food, medicine, and engineers, not soldiers. When a Karate patrol spotted them, they didn't challenge. They just watched. And then moved on. That was the real victory, not fear, not obedience. Respect. On Ceres Station, Kyle Dawson helped install a new comms array. Not for war, but for open channels with neutral worlds. He thought of his daughter now in school on Earth, learning about stars not as distant lights but as possible homes. He smiled. Maybe one day she'd visit those stars not as a beggar at the council's table, but as an equal. Dr. Naomi Ellis in her lab in Denver studied the shift in galactic politics like a scientist watches a chemical reaction. The council was losing its grip, not because humanity had attacked it, but because it had offered a better way. Fair trade, honest words, no lies wrapped in diplomacy. Species were tired of being told what to do by beings who'd never walked their soil or held their children. Humanity hadn't promised perfection, it had promised fairness, and that was enough. Then came the message. It arrived on a neutral frequency routed through a Helios relay. No encryption, no code, just a simple audio file sent from a small vessel drifting near the edge of human space. The ship was Karathi but unarmed. No weapons, no shields, just a single pilot and a white banner painted on its hull. The message was short, spoken in clear, careful English. We wish to talk. President Hayes received the file in his office. He played it once, then again. He didn't smile. He didn't sigh. He just turned to his aide and said, "Send it to Admiral Ruiz. Tell her to meet them at Station Theta. No weapons. No escorts. Just her." 2 days later, Captain Ruiz, now promoted to Admiral, stood on the observation deck of Station Theta, a small repair outpost orbiting a dead moon near Neptune. The Karathi ship docked without issue. The pilot stepped out alone, tall, armored, but with no weapon at his side. He carried a data chip in his hand. Ruiz met him at the airlock. No guards, no translators. They spoke in basic trade language, the kind used in ports across the galaxy. "You came far," she said. "We had to," he replied. "We were wrong," she nodded. That was enough. Inside the station, they sat at a plain metal table. The chip contained no demands, no treaties, just a request to speak, to listen, to start over, not as counsel and subject, but as two peoples who had made mistakes. Ruiz sent the chip to Earth. President Hayes reviewed it. Then he called General Boone, Dr. Ellis, and a few others. They talked for hours. Not about power, not about control, about what came next. The next morning, Hayes sent his reply. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a declaration. Just a short message broadcast on the same neutral channel. Humanity speaks only as equals now. The words spread fast, not as a threat, as an invitation. Within weeks, more ships came. Not warships, not spies, representatives, scientists, traders, all asking the same thing. Can we talk? The Galactic Council watched, helpless. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't control it. Because the galaxy had changed its mind. On Earth, children played under open skies. On Mars, farmers harvested crops under red suns. In orbit, ships moved with purpose, not fear. Humanity hadn't conquered the stars. It had earned its place among them. And for the first time in a long time, the galaxy listened. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to.